All the personal finance books, they're wrong. Or are they? Well, today what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the top 50 personal finance books of all time and compare them against academic research to see who's right. This one is titled All the Personal Finance Books Are Wrong, and it comes to us from The Atlantic.
Yeah, that's the title of the article that's kind of reviewing the research, right? So there's a bit of a rabbit hole here, but I love the idea of taking the top 50 personal finance books and comparing what they say about a certain set of topics, and then seeing if it compares at all to what popular academic research is saying.
No, I never had this opportunity to have such a cool professor. I mean, I had some cool professors, but this sounds like a class I could really get behind. Something that I would really enjoy. This is a white paper that was put out by James Choi, Professor James Choi from Yale University, and it is titled Popular Personal Financial Advice versus the Professors. I'm like, fantastic. I want to dig into that. I mean, how great would that be as a student? Because as a student, for me, it was all academic. And when I got into the real world, I found that a lot of the things that I learned weren't very applicable when you're working with individuals on a one-on-one basis. They have human behavioral traits that don't really line up with what the academic research says that you should actually be doing. So getting both of those things, taking that personal financial advice from those top personal financial books and aligning it with academic research and comparing and contrasting the differences would be so valuable as a student. There's real world experience in the classroom. I love it. And we could cut straight to the chase here. You know, what is the conclusion of all of this? You know, read through the white paper, read through the article in the Atlantic, and the bottom line is I think there's a couple of big takeaways there. One, I think as you look at a lot of these personal finance books, they're not taking into consideration the academic research. You don't see that, right? And there's a lot of examples of that. I think especially when you look at the white paper, you look at asset allocation. Asset allocation is largely, it just seems like it was off the cuff. Withdrawal rates, it was off the cuff.
Across the board, it was very different,
Yeah, and there was very rarely any academic research that was cited in any of these top personal finance books. Why? Because nobody wants to read academic research, right?
Except for us.
But that's what you have to do in order to make good decisions. You have to blend the academic with the behavioral elements. And that's why we do that here on the show is we bring on all of these personal finance experts, these professors, these behavioral finance experts. We want to stay up to date on the latest research so that we can make better decisions, not just for our clients, but for ourselves as well. This is why when I do a podcast, that's my favorite time of the week when I have the opportunity to interview somebody because I'm going to learn something from them.
And that's part of our journey too, and why we do what we do is just trying to stay abreast of what these trends are. I mean, I meet with families every day where I can understand what's on their mind and what their concerns are and how they're dealing with the challenges that they're facing. But then I want to back that up with some academic research and understand what the cutting edge is saying. Looking at Wade Pfau. I mean, Wade Pfau has been on your podcast as well as all of his partners over there at the Retirement Researcher, really understanding this groundbreaking work that they're doing and trying to understand, are we doing what's in the very best interests of our families?
They're the only ones that I see they're learning from both sides, right? They're learning from both sides and helping people make better decisions that aren't simply academic in nature, but are taking a look at you as an individual. You know, when we talk to Bob French and we talk to Wade Pfau and we talk to Alex Mergua, what are the things that we find? They're all three planning for their retirement in a different way. You know, but they're also doing it in a research-backed way, but they understand that they're humans and they have traits that make them individuals. And that's what I think.
How great is that, right? How great is that? Michael Kitces did this article on this retirement, on their retirement income style awareness. And they really came up with kind of this strategy for trying to understand what type of income strategy suits your personality. And all three of these guys chose a different method. And so if they're sitting there going, well, the three of us can't agree on one strategy, what are these folks going to be able to do?
They understand that everybody can't be fit into a box, but both of these sides can learn from one another. So you have one that the personal finance experts or those gurus that are writing these books, they should be looking at the academic research and actually leveraging that academic research and blending it with the human element to help people make better decisions. But on the other side of things too, the academics can learn from personal finance experts at the same time. I think there's kind of three different areas that I see in the white paper that I wanted to break out and kind of focus into. One is the differences between saving for retirement, the differences in asset allocation advice, and then some mortgage advice as well. Right. I think saving for retirement gives you the clearest picture of the difference between these two. You have most of the personal finance experts saying to save a set percentage of your income forever, 10%, 15%, 20%. I think largely it was 10% was the number that was kind of the majority number in these top 50 personal finance books. 10%, whether you're making $30,000 or $300,000, you're always saving 10%. And then the academic research shows something else. They say you should have a no savings rate or a negative savings rate in those early years because you're going to be making more dollars down the road. So why save $3,000 today when you could be saving $30,000 to make up for it down the road?
Yeah. So it looks like more of a bell curve, right? When you're in your 20s and early 30s, you're not saving much, and then you start to ramp it up. By the time you're in your peak earning years, you're maxing out this savings.
What I'm really surprised by there is it has so much more allure to it to a young individual, right?
Yeah, it sounds great. I saw an article on here when I Googled this article. It says one of the headlines from Money Magazine was, "Economists confirm it's actually okay not to save in your 20s."
Yeah. That is really assuring, and it feels like, oh, great, I can just spend everything right now.
I'm not saving, so I'm glad I'm not.
This is where the personal finance experts got it right, I think. I've always been one of those savers. I've always strived to save as much as I could every single year, 10%, 20%, and save a little bit more every year. That was always what I lived by. Now, when I first got out of college, I wasn't making much, right? I was making a lot less than I thought I would, graduating during the financial crisis. And I was still putting money in my Roth IRA. And I would ask my friends at the time, hey, you put money in your Roth? And I remember one friend, he said, no, why would I do that? I'm going to make a lot more money down the road. Like, why would I make sacrifices today to not go out to dinner with my friends or, do X, Y, and Z?
Those experiences.
Yeah. Why would I sacrifice that when I'm going to make a lot more money down the road? I can tell you for a fact today, those individuals are not in as good a financial position today because they never learned to save. Right. The habit was never ingrained in them. So once they did get more income, what happened? They just continued to spend it, right? Lifestyle creep comes into play. This is why you pay yourself first. I am a strong believer. Pay yourself first. Always be saving, because otherwise you're just going to continue to creep up that lifestyle, and it's going to be hard to dial this back. This is the same reason that the most successful retirees have trouble spending in retirement, right? Because they've been savers. They've been savers their whole lives.
Yeah, they've been ingrained in these habits, and these habits get ingrained, and sometimes it's hard to reverse them. And so when I hear you describe that, I was speaking to our kind of video producer before this segment started, and he was asking me about how to save when you're in your 20s. And I think it's kind of a combination of those two. Like, start out just trying to set a set percentage. Maybe it is 10%. But then as your income increases, then you do the other side of it where you're starting to save a lot more when your income rises. But just be aware of the pitfalls and the challenges of lifestyle creep. And it's a lot harder to go backwards from a spending perspective than it is a savings perspective.
Yeah, I think it's so hard. It doesn't matter how strong you think your mind is. I just don't think you're going to be able to dial up that savings from saving 0 to 25%, in a matter of a few years.
Well, and how about the retirement strategies that say, okay, well, yeah, but if you have some bad years, you're going to have to cut back on your income from your withdrawals from your portfolio, right? How difficult is it, especially in retirement? You've built this lifestyle for all these years. How am I going to cut back 20%, 30% of my lifestyle when it's ingrained in who we are?
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that I was really surprised by this. 50 top personal finance books. None of them advocated for even taking a look at Social Security when determining how much you should be saving for retirement. Right, really? When Social Security on average accounts for close to 65% of the average retiree's income in retirement, why wouldn't we be taking that into consideration when actually determining what our savings rate should be? And in conjunction with that, I mean, I know the withdrawal rates were all over the place, right? I mean, the withdrawal rates were anywhere from 3%, 4%, 5%, 6.7%, 8% per year. I mean, and not very many of them backed by academic research, especially the 8% one, right? And they're not, if I'm saying you're going to be able to draw 8% of your portfolio, the stock market averages 12% a year, inflation's going to be 4%, then I shouldn't have to save as much for retirement.
Right.
Why wouldn't we take that projected withdrawal rate down the road in consideration when determining how much we should be saving for retirement? That's what it should be derived from. I think there's far too many individuals out there today that are just saying, well, they told me to save 10%, I'm doing good, or I'm saving 20%, or I'm doing good. And that's, without giving up any names, there's individuals that I know that are like that, right? And I'm saying, well, you're doing good maybe, but why don't we sit down and build a plan to determine how much you should be saving? Because personal finance is what, Marshall?
It's very personal. Right?
If you'd like to take the information that you've gleaned here to the next level, all you have to do is this. Click the link in the description and schedule a 15-minute phone consultation with an advisor on our team where you can get answers to your own unique questions and concerns. So those are kind of the three things that I saw that kind of stood out to me in the article, from a saving for retirement standpoint.
Yeah, and I love the fact that he looked into savings, asset allocation, mortgages of the top 50 personal finance books, and 3 of them didn't include any of those topics. In what's going on in those 3 books, Casey?
Yeah, there's a lot that could be missing from a personal finance book. So up next, asset allocation.
Yeah.
So we covered saving for retirement, Social Security considerations, withdrawal rate considerations, personal habits around saving considerations there. Now when it comes to asset allocation, there were some things there that come from academic research that aren't really taken into consideration when it looks at your asset allocation. One of the things that is often said in some of these books was that you should use the rule of 100. So if you're 30, how should you allocate your portfolio to stocks and bonds? You should have 30% in fixed income, 70% in stocks, right? That's the rule of 100. And then you just ratchet up that fixed income, by 1% every year as you get closer to retirement. And academic research says you're completely missing out on something called labor supply flexibility. And that is, okay, you're 30 years old and you're generating $50,000 a year in income. That is a fixed income that you're generating from your work. And you have a lot of labor supply built up inside you.
You've got a lot of years before you retire.
You got a runway,
20
boy.
years, 30 years.
And if it's $50,000, you could say that that's equivalent to $1 million bond paying a 5% coupon payment, right?
There you go.
So you have maybe $100,000 over here and you're investing it in a 70-30 portfolio. And then you've got $1 million effectively because of your income earning potential that is fixed income. So you actually are over allocated to fixed income and you could justify being 100% equities in your investment portfolio. And it flips as you get to retirement, right? You get closer to retirement, you no longer have that income earning potential runway. That labor supply flexibility has become very inflexible at that point. So now we're reducing the equity exposure and building up that fixed income exposure to replace what you had in effectively being fixed income during your working years.
I think it's fantastic. And it's actually a concept that I'd never really been positioned to before. And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think you feel it as you near retirement. You can feel this psychology of what you just described, but I've yet to have somebody put it into words. And I think it's a fantastic way to look at this. Yes, in your 30s, you could be 100% in equities because of this large fixed income that you have in your potential working years.
And then you have marginal utility. And this is one that I think of a lot. This was just something that was ingrained in me from a very young age, and something my dad talks about all the time. If you have, and my dad would often frame it this way: he'd say, if you have $1 million today, and that million turns into $1.2 million, how did that change your life? So, well, not really. It didn't really change anything. I got a little more money. That's cool. But
Feel better.
I'm not going to start dressing any different or driving a nicer car. It's okay. What if that $1 million turns into $500,000? You go, oh, that changes my life, right? That's a problem, and that is because the additional dollar, maybe your number's $1 million, 500,000, 10 million. It doesn't matter. But at some point, you get to your number. You realize you have enough. Once you have enough, that additional dollar beyond that enough number has reduced utility. Now, for an individual that doesn't have enough, you're a young individual, you're saving for retirement, that additional dollar, going from $1 million to 1.1 million, okay, minor marginal utility. If I go from 100,000 to 200,000, that's a big impact, right? And we should be weighing that into our asset allocation decisions. So once you have enough, you might say, I don't need the risk anymore, so why take it? Because the marginal utility isn't there. When I'm younger, I should have a higher equity allocation, be more be more prone to risk, be more comfortable with risk, because that additional dollar means so much more to me. It's not just about looking at your risk tolerance in a vacuum, but also taking into consideration something called marginal utility and labor supply flexibility.
Yeah, you take your assets and you look at those at the start of retirement, and we meet many families that have saved enough. They've actually saved more than enough to live their life. They don't need to take an awful lot of risk, but yet they were ingrained in that 60-40 mentality, that total return mentality, and you can stick with that strategy, but understanding what you described really should help you reframe that conversation around risk.
Yeah, think about it more. And I was surprised that it was the academics taking this stuff into consideration, because I felt like it should be the personal finance experts having these conversations with individuals who go, well, I already have enough. Why take any more risk? And the academics going, well, you can afford to take the risk, so take the risk, right? And so it's just this really interesting dichotomy between these two worlds. And then you have a couple other pieces to the asset allocation. You have taxation, and the way a lot of these books talk about generating income in retirement is they're very slanted towards generating dividend income. Right. So have a high generating dividend income portfolio because you're going to live off the dividends. And the research says, well, we're not taking into consideration taxes if we're just generating dividends, because we would be more tax efficient if we were focusing on generating capital gains. We can have a value-driven portfolio that doesn't generate much in the way of dividend income, where most of our income is going to be generated by actually taking some of our gains off the table and liquidating some of those positions at a lower capital gains rate versus a non-qualified dividends rate or an interest, an ordinary income tax rate.
Right.
In the way of interest.
And talking about the performance historically of growth stocks versus dividend value stocks would slant the data the other direction too. But understanding that those dividend streams are taxable may not be the best thing for you in those taxable accounts. I love the dichotomy. I love the way that we can debate whether these things are appropriate for each given situation.
Yeah, and think about international allocation. I mean, some of these books recommended zero exposure to international equities. And the majority of them had a reduced exposure to international equities, say somewhere around 20-25%, where the research says you should be weighting each country by its market cap relative to global market capitalization. So you should have closer to 60% of your assets outside the United States, internationally diversified. I think there's a lot of things to be gleaned from these books that doesn't necessarily show up in that research that could justify a lower international allocation. But I think your takeaway from that and from this research, from the white paper, should be, well, maybe I should have more in the way of international allocation, because we meet with people every day that do have this home country bias where they're 100% allocated to U.S. equities and they're not getting any international diversification.
Well, and it's not just the United States. I mean, we see this in European investors. We see it in all over the globe, where your home country is the bias of your portfolio.
Yeah. And then they wrap up a little bit with a mortgage discussion around adjustable rate mortgages, fixed rate mortgages, and when you should have one, when you should have the other. Most of the books just say you shouldn't even touch an adjustable rate mortgage. It should always be a fixed rate mortgage. A lot of them are pushing for shorter term mortgages, say 15 years instead of 30 years. And
because of the psychology, the human side of that.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily the reality. The mortgage decision is so much more complicated than that. Yeah. Whether you're going to have an adjustable rate mortgage or not might depend entirely on your holding period. Maybe you're only going to live in that home for 5 years. You can get a better rate with an adjustable rate mortgage. Maybe you should be doing an adjustable rate mortgage rather than that 30-year fixed rate mortgage. There's just more to take into consideration rather than these blanket statements that everybody should get a 15-year fixed rate mortgage. So that's why you're here. That's why you're listening to us, because you want the research, and that's what we're sharing with you today.